What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and last week we devoted a bunch of our time to draft strategy. We talked about early, late, middle draft slot positions, how to attack each of those spots. We are prepared for draft season, and now it's time to get our last second player takes in, our last second flag plants in, before it's time to start preparing for week one next Monday. So with that being said, we are going to talk about 5 players I am fading in the early rounds of drafts this year. Let's not waste any time. If you enjoyed the video at any point, make sure you get down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
Now for this video, we are classifying early round players as players getting taken in the first 3 rounds of Underdog Fantasy drafts. Now before we get into our first fade, make sure if you haven't already, you check out Underdog Fantasy, use promo code RON when you sign up. That will get you your deposit matched all the way up to $100. You can go on there and play in their Best Ball Mania 3 tournament that is 75% full at this point. They have $2 million up top to first place, $1 million a second, $1 million to the regular season winner. And right now is the best time to draft. This is a great chart from Michael Dubner showing that right now, late August is the most plus EV to draft your underdog team. So if you haven't already, make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code RON. They will match your deposit all the way up to $100. I'll have a link at the top of the description. I'll have a link at the top of the comments. Make sure you check it out. And our first fade for today is going to be Derrick Henry. I have him in my rankings as the 112 as my RB7. He's going off the board on Underdog at the 108 as the RB4. And that's not a huge discrepancy, but when we're talking about first-round draft picks, that's the difference between a middle guy and a 1-2 turn guy. So that's why I'm not really ending up with a ton of Derrick Henry. I only have him on 5.3% of my Underdog teams, and I just want to be clear how I feel about Derrick Henry, why I don't have him on a ton of teams, and why he's a fade for me. I know the Derrick Henry hype is going to come out and terrorize me in this comment section, so I have to speak cautiously here. And the thing I would like to say about Derrick Henry is he's an amazing real-life running back. I would consider him and Jonathan Taylor the 2 best running backs alive right now. But here's the holdup with Derrick Henry. We're talking about through a fantasy football perspective, not in real-life perspective. And when we talk about his fantasy profile, there's 2 things I don't like about it. 1, unsustainable usage, and 2, his price. Now let's talk about Derrick Henry and what people believe his ceiling is. And you guys know I'm chasing ceiling. I'm always looking for running backs with that legendary upside of 23+ points per game that Pat Crane talks about. He flashed 24 point per game upside in 8 games last year, so why is he not a target for me? That is legendary upside. And the issue for me is I think that 24 point per game stretch last year was just a flash in the pan. And I'm not saying that he's not really talented. I'm saying that he only got that number on unsustainable volume. He's like my car that I drove in high school, a 2001 Ford Explorer. And yes, you can get to that upside of 100 miles per hour, but you get there, things start to shake, things are making noises, you know, you think you're going to fly off the highway, and then eventually the car breaks down, it falls apart. That feels like Derrick Henry to me. Because when we look at the last 3 years for Derrick Henry, this is how his usage breaks down. This is since he's had his first top 5 season in 2019. In 2019, he goes from scoring just shy of 20 points per game on 14.7 weighted opportunities. Then in 2020, he goes to just shy of 21 points per game on 17.2 weighted opportunities per game. Remember, in that year, he ran for 2,000 yards on 378 carries. 17.2 weighted opportunities is a lot. It's like a top 3 number in the NFL. Then last year, he cranks that up to 20.4 weighted opportunities per game. That's a lot, which then resulted in 24.2 points per game, but that also led him to breaking down after 8 games. So if this 24 point per game upside only exists in a world where Derrick Henry sees 3 more weighted opportunities per game than he did when he rushed for 2,000 rushing yards, I don't know how that is sustainable. And when we look at Mike Clay's projection for 2022, he has Derrick Henry's points per game at 18 and his weighted opportunities per game at 17.6, and I think that's fair. Now, the point per game is his median projection. He still has upside for that 20 to 21 point per game area that we've seen him flash in the past. He can get there on crazy efficiency, but this next level to that 23, 24 point per game area, I don't think that exists. Remember, again, he got 2,000 rushing yards on 17 weighted opportunities per game, and he didn't crack 21 points per game. There really isn't a world out there without that unprecedented volume where he gets to that ceiling that you want from him. And again, that ceiling only exists in a world where he is on unsustainable volume and he breaks down after 5 to 8 games. So I don't see this massive ceiling that cancels out his really low floor as this running back that is about to turn 29. We know running backs, as they get older, they fall off. Look at Zeke, look at Todd Gurley, look at David Johnson. And now he has over 1,600 career touches, and he has multiple screws along with a metal plate in his foot after his injury from last year. His injury risk for this year is so high that Dr. Edwin Porras, who by the way does great injury research over on Fantasy Points, has these injury volatility tiers. And in the highest red, bright red risk tier is Derrick Henry. I just think that when we're looking at the first round, there's better bets to make in the middle of the first when you have guys like Eckler, Diggs, Devontae Adams. Would even prefer guys like Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift over Derrick Henry, especially in home leagues where he goes top 5 on Sleeper, Yahoo, and ESPN and PPR leagues. You're passing on guys like Cooper Kupp, Jefferson, Jamar Chase for Derrick Henry. I don't think that that is a good idea. Now, this isn't me saying that Derrick Henry is a bad player. I just think he's a bad bet. And even then, he's still my 112. I would take him at the 1-2 turn, but most of the time where I'm drafting, he's not falling that far. Next up, we have Najee Harris, who's going off the board at the 111 as the RB6. In my rankings, he's my 203 as the RB9. And again, it's not a huge discrepancy, but I'm just not really ending up with a ton of Najee because it's very rare that he falls to the second round. Especially in home leagues, he's going to be going in that 107 to 109 area. And the theme with these early round running backs is, do we have a chance at legendary upside in that 23-plus point per game area? And if not, we should probably fade them because we know running backs don't have high floors. Across the board, running backs don't have floors in general. So when we draft a running back early, we want to have that league-breaking type upside. And I don't think Najee Harris has that. And I know he's a young year 2 running back. I should like him the same way I do Javonte Williams. He's a young ascending running back. That upside should be there. The issue is that I don't think that Najee Harris has the profile of a running back that can be that efficient, can be that big in fantasy. To me, he feels more like a Leonard Fournette type who will top out at 18 to 19 points per game. Leonard Fournette had his highest point per game season last season at 18.3 points per game. I think that's probably where Najee stalls out at. And the reason for that is that he was inefficient last year, and he doesn't have the profile of a back who is efficient in the NFL. Last year, his expected points per game, so expected points per game is just a metric based on your volume, your red zone touches, how many points should you have had per game. His expected points per game last year was 18.7. He ended up with 17.7 points per game. That's -1 fantasy points over expected per game. He is the only running back last year to hit -1 or worse among the top 12 running backs in points per game. I think that mark was like outside the top 100 running backs on RotoViz. So I'm just not sure that he gets better in that area in year 2. He doesn't profile as an efficient playmaker. He's 28th in breakaway runs. He's this big 230, 240 pound, slow plodding back. And it's hard for me to paint a picture where he gives you efficiency. So if you don't have the talent to be efficient and to be skilled enough for 23 plus points per game, you need a top scoring offense. He's not in a spot where you can benefit from that. He's on the Steelers. The offensive line isn't great. You have Trubisky at quarterback, Pickett maybe at quarterback as well. So he's a running back propped up by volume, which is fine, but just not a profile that I like in the middle to late first round. Also, while I'm recording this video, it's 9:30 p.m. on Sunday. We don't know what his foot injury is, but I saw talks on Twitter while I was doing research that he got some kind of foot injury. He might not be ready to go for week 1. If he even is ready to go for week 1, he's still getting drafted highly. I think that's even more reason why you should fade Najee. Then we have Joe Mixon, who goes at the 202 on Underdog as the RB7. In my rankings, he's my 209 as the RB13. So about a half round lower, 6 running back spots lower. And this is another one with Joe Mixon where I just don't see the upside. Mixon hit a career high in points per game last year in his 5th season at only 18 points per game. And there's 2 main issues with this. First, he ran hot on touchdowns. He had 16 total touchdowns and still couldn't offer 22 plus point per game type upside. And then also his receiving work has just completely stalled out. He came into the NFL with a great receiving profile, but it just hasn't manifested. We are now on year 5, or we're actually on year 6 now, and his career high in receptions in a season is 43. That's not great. That's not going to get you there. You need to have like 65 plus to get into that like upper, 21 plus point per game area. I don't see that increasing with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins balling out. So if the receiving work isn't going to improve, maybe the touchdowns can get him there. But again, he hit 16 last year and still wasn't even close to 20 points per game. You can maybe make the case that this offensive line got better, right? They bring in Lael Collins. They actually bring in some difference makers on the O-line. Maybe it gets better from there. But even then, I don't think from an efficiency standpoint, it would propel him much further than that 18 to 19 point per game area. He just feels like a classic high floor running back you take at the turn for maximum safety, sort of like a similar profile to when Josh Jacobs was going at that 1-2 turn early on in his career. I just can't pass on profiles like Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift, CeeDee Lamb, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, even a Javonte Williams for Joe Mixon. After all that, I'll put him down there, but I'll never end up with him at that price. Then we have Mike Evans, who's going at the 210 as the wide receiver 8 on Underdog. In my rankings, he's the 302 as my wide receiver 11. And that's really not that far off, right? Only 4 spots. But that's because his price has really fell since early in the offseason, where they didn't have Antonio Brown, they didn't have Gronk, they didn't have a healthy Chris Godwin. Godwin looks much better than he did back then. They didn't have Julio Jones, so it was like, okay, Mike Evans is going to be the only guy there. He's going to have a massive target share. He's going to ball out. And I think that's still sort of the sentiment that's like propelling his ADP into this late second area, but I just can't pay for it there. I think he's fine in like the early third, but I'd rather have T. Higgins over him. I'd rather have A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews. So I never end up with him. He never gets to the third round, and that's why he's a fade for me. Now, I know you guys are going to yell at your screen, well, Ron, Mike Evans is going to be a lock for 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. And I'm sure that he'll get there, but I'm not sure that's the way I want to spend my second round pick. Evans isn't this target hog anymore. Again, they added weapons since early in the offseason, and you just can't project Evans to have a huge target share at this point. He was a 16.4% target share guy last year. Outside of the top 50 wide receivers, he was a 17.52% target per out run guy, 62nd among 89 qualifying wide receivers with 50 or more targets. Just not very good. He's not going to get a ton of volume. Again, now you have Julio coming in. You have Godwin, who's going to be healthy, taking a lot of targets away, and you're kind of banking on Tom Brady more than you're banking on Evans, because it's not really a talent play. It's not a target earning play. It is a, okay, we're hoping for touchdowns and big chunk plays from Evans, which might get him there, but it's just not a bet that I like to make. I would rather have a guy like A.J. Brown, who is going to command much more targets than Mike Evans, somebody that I think is more skilled than Mike Evans right now, might have a worse quarterback, but A.J. Brown in a position like wide receiver is much more in control of his upside, of his fantasy output than Mike Evans. Mike Evans just kind of flies by the tails of what Tom Brady can get him to, instead of vice versa. I think the way to play that wide receiver room in general is to just wait and grab Godwin like the 5th, 6th round, buy the injury discount, or go Julio Jones, who on a per round basis isn't that far off from Mike Evans, and it wouldn't be crazy to see Julio Jones have a similar year to someone like Antonio Brown last year, where he's giving you like fringe top 24 numbers, eating into Mike Evans numbers. That's all in play in this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. I don't think that Evans is the best way to get a chunk of this passing offense. Last, we have Nick Chubb, who goes off the board at the 302 as the RB14. In my rankings, he's my 505 as my RB16. So 2 rounds lower, only 2 running back spots lower. And this is because Nick Chubb profiles to me as a dead zone running back, somebody that is just going to project for 15 to 16 points per game like he had last year, that you can replicate off of waivers. Now, I show this tweet from Jacob Sanderson all the time, but it really highlights what I'm talking about here, where Nick Chubb last year averaged about 15 points per game as the RB12, RB11-ish, and that production was replaceable off waivers. We saw Devontae Booker, Darrell Williams, Deonta Foreman, Cordarrelle Patterson, Elijah Mitchell, even guys not on this list like Rashad Penny and Justin Jackson, and you can even go out there and look at Dearness Johnson. When their starters went down, they're giving you production that can match a Nick Chubb. So Nick Chubb, as the season goes on, is pretty easily replaced by the rest of your opponents after you just sunk 3rd round draft capital into a Chubb. Now, I want to say off the top, before we even break down Nick Chubb's profile, and while I think that he profiles as a 15 point per game guy, Nick Chubb is extremely talented. After the top 2 of Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb is amazing. He's a top 5 running back in the NFL at worst. He's amazing, but this is fantasy. He's great for football, but in terms of fantasy, I'm just not interested at this price. I shoot for upside at running back, and I think that Chubb feels like a floor play. And the issue is that I don't think that Chubb is even that safe. If we look at the last 2 years, he's returned below an 8.3% win rate, which is 1 divided by 12, 8.3%. So he's given you a net negative return on investment the last 2 years, along with missing 3 to 4 games in each of those seasons. His highest workload over the last 2 years as well came last season with a 51.7% snap share and a 58.3% opportunity share. Both numbers barely crack the top 20 at running back. He's a low usage guy. They won't feed him as a bell cow. Again, if I was the coach, I would feed him as a bell cow. I would give him all the touches. He's Nick Chubb. He's amazing, but they don't for whatever reason. And the reason for this low usage from the staff is that 1, he's not a strong pass catcher, and 2, he shares a backfield with 2 really talented running backs. When we look at Chubb, the pass catcher, his career high target share came in 2019 with a 9.6% target share. Outside of the top 24 running backs that year, and then last season, he only hit a 6.3% target share, which was 56th among running backs, behind guys like A.J. Dillon, Alexander Mattison. Pass catching is massive in PPR, and Nick Chubb not offering any of that upside really hurts his upside case in PPR leagues. So they don't give him bell cow volume, and they don't give him receiving production to make up for it. The other issue is that maybe you're hoping, well, Kareem Hunt gets traded, and Nick Chubb will be the guy. The issue is that there's been 7 games that Kareem Hunt has missed over the last 2 seasons, and in those, nothing has changed for Nick Chubb. He goes from about 16.5 4 points per game to like 16.9 points per game. He goes from 1.68 targets to 1.86 targets per game. Rush attempts stays at about 16. Nothing really changed from a volume standpoint for Chubb, whether Kareem Hunt's in the lineup or not. And then the issue is that even if Kareem Hunt gets traded away or cut, Dearness Johnson's behind him, and he's extremely talented compared to what we thought of Dearness Johnson coming out. He was first in PFF rushing grade last year, second in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. When Kareem Hunt was out last year, Johnson inherited those touches from Kareem Hunt, not Chubb. And then when Chubb was out, Dearness Johnson averaged about 16 points per game in his absence as well. He's a good running back. So there's no upside scenario where Nick Chubb is this absolute monster because they're not on an offense where he can score, 15 to 20 touchdowns. Jacoby Brissett looks like he's going to be the quarterback through 12 weeks there. There's really not a ton of upside. You also have there's not going to be any receiving workload that he's going to benefit from. And then on top of that, when his running back mates go down, he doesn't benefit from it whatsoever. So there's not really any outs to him exceeding that 15 point per game type area that he's hovered around the last few years. So for that reason, he's not somebody that I'm touching in that dead zone. Now that's going to do it for us today, fellas. As always, if you want to go out there and make sure that you're fading these players that I talked about here, crushing your home leagues, make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be down below in the description. It'll be at the top of the comments down below. And on there, I have rankings to make sure that you're fading these bad profiles early, pushing up the legendary running backs to the running backs with legendary upside up top, taking wide receivers through the dead zone, and then pushing up those Pollards, those CEHs, Ramondre Stevenson, so that you're not taking Russell Gages and Jacoby Myers over really fertile ground for running backs. Now, I also keep forgetting to talk about it, but if we hit 1,000 patrons, I think we're at like 700-ish right now. It's a really big goal, but if we hit 1,000 patrons before week 1 of the NFL season, that first Sunday, so if it's after that first Thursday, whatever, I will pick a patron, randomly select them, and we will be doing a $1,000 high-stakes draft. I cover the entire buy-in. Me and that patron split the winnings 50-50. I think it'll be a really cool stream. It'll be a really fun experience. So if you want to see that happen, make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice. Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena for misdemeanors.